A informação que tivemos aqui relativamente à Suécia é muito útil para nós no momento em que se está a tentar impor esta municipalização da educação, porque mostra, é evidente que o que acontece num país não pode ser transposto diretamente para o outro, não se pode fazer essa transposição, mas de facto mostra que há determinadas reformas e caminhos que Portugal ao longo dos anos tem vindo a seguir, que já foram experimentados noutros países, que deram maus resultados, e o que agora estamos a ver, que é uma tentativa de reverter esse processo de desregulação, descentralização e até de privatização, na Suécia é muito isso, do mercado da educação, neste momento a perspectiva não apenas dos sindicatos, mas do próprio governo, é de ir fazendo contra-reformas para ir reganhando algum controle no plano nacional sobre o sistema de ensino. Portanto, estamos a fazer, damos argumentos agressivos para contestarmos este processo que está em curso. Agora vamos ouvir a experiência dos Países Baixos. A Trudy Kerperien é professora de língua e literatura francesas, ativista sindical desde o início da sua carreira na educação, é membro eleito do Conselho Nacional do seu sindicato, que é AOB, General Union for Education, e é secretária internacional do sindicato. É vice-presidente do Comitê Sindical Europeu de Educação, que é a estrutura europeia internacional da educação. E tem uma particularidade: de todos os membros da mesa, é a pessoa que mais se pode sentir em casa, porque já esteve em vários congressos nossos nos últimos anos, e portanto é quem melhor nos conhece dos elementos que estão aqui na mesa. Trudy, I have the floor. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues from FENPROF. Yes, I see the slide. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your 40th anniversary celebration and to speak at this conference about the Netherlands. What I'm going to say, you will recognize some things of it, because some of our troubles look like what happens in the UK, and other things may look like what happens in Sweden, but still, this is a different country. So I took this slide as the first slide, so you will recognize it. I didn't put any text there apart from FENPROF 40. The empty chair, there should be a teacher. There is nobody in many schools. So, like in the other countries, in the Netherlands we have a huge teacher shortage. It's not unique, you heard that. But it was foreseen decades ago. We try to put it on the agenda of all governments over time. But all these governments, if they were central, left-wing, right-wing, they all have ignored it or simply played it down all this time. I could go back many, many years, even to the last century, like my colleague from Sweden did. She went back to the 90s, but I will start in this century. Let me cite just a letter to our government from my union from 2004, in which we already warned them about growing shortages and the issues the government should address to counter these shortages. For example, the salary gap, the big salary gap between the public and the private sector, the high number of teaching hours, the big class sizes, and all this especially bringing vulnerable pupils in danger. That was in 2004. And let me cite one sentence from a report in 2007, a report from a special committee on the teaching profession that was established by the Minister of Education we had at that moment. It was the only one who tried something positive. After doing the research, the president of the committee confirmed what we already had been saying all along. He said, we are, as the Netherlands, on the brink of a dramatic quantitative shortage of quality teachers. And the most important reason that was given at that time, the high pay gap of the public sector and education, especially compared to professions requiring the same high-level training. We were lagging 15 to 30% behind others. And this was even within the public sector. It led to something positive, to the decision to invest 1 billion euros. So that looks positive, but then it was 2007. There are some time flows between such a decision and implementation. What happened? The actual investment never happened because of the economic crisis. Because from 2008 on, things went wrong. The education sector was the first sector where salaries were frozen, so zero salary raise for many years, nothing happened. And the few investments that were done since then, mostly after union actions, they were not even enough for schools to repair buildings, to pay for heating costs, or to buy new materials or equipment. And they were always incidental, we call them. They were one-off investments, they were never structural. And worse, often an investment in one sector led to budget cuts in another, within education. But our problems are not only caused by salary issues. I just want to show you one slide about the shortages. It's a quite recent one, it's only about primary education, but you can, I translated the Dutch image into English. You can see it's in percentages because the numbers will not say much. The biggest problems are in the largest cities, and especially in the schools, in the poor parts of the city with many vulnerable children. And this is just primary education, so this is just an example of the shortages. Now, to understand the complexity of the situation in the Netherlands, it is important to know something about the system and the education financing. We have a decentralized system. You heard the words used by Sarah, but it's different from Sweden. In my country, it means that although the minister on the national level remains responsible for education in general, the financial flow is not directly going from the ministry to schools, but a lump sum of money, so a big sack of money, is going to a lower sectoral level from which it's further distributed. So at the time, the idea was that adapting to specific situations would be much more efficient and flexible if choices could be made closer to schools. But what really happened, and what we feared as unions, is that a very new, thick, intermediate layer of management was created. School boards started to act as employers, and they created employers' organizations, and they cost money. And the transparency of the financial flows disappeared completely. Unions had from then on to negotiate with employers. But they never tell us exactly what the amount of money is they get from the government. So we never know on what amount we are negotiating. It's very complicated. And this new layer is also having a negative effect on teacher autonomy because it bases all its policy on distrust of teachers, and there is a lot of controlling mechanisms in place. So they see teachers not as an investment but as costs, and they prefer to have the money for themselves. And then one layer lower, schools and education institutions receive a lump sum, so one bag of money, in which the exact amount for salaries is not earmarked. And all this money does never cover all necessary expenses, so schools will try to keep expenses as low as possible, and they focus mainly on the salaries to keep them as low as possible, because they want to have money for maintenance and other expenses, because they're responsible of the buildings too. And this has led to a growing number of temporary contracts because it's cheaper to get rid of people then. So a lot of teachers have a contract that ends before summer and they can come back after summer, for example, but it's cheaper for schools. And we have also seen a lot of cases of schools trying to get rid of older, more expensive personnel. Now, there is something else. Workload, burnout. There is the workload factor. In the Netherlands, we teach a lot more hours than on average in OECD countries. A few years ago, it was like 17% more teaching hours than the average. And our class sizes are bigger. I think we are not far from the UK. We are in this higher rank on these OECD scales. And we had a kind of forced introduction of inclusive education, and we are not against inclusive education, but what happened there was no adequate training for teachers, there was no extra time, no support, no adapted buildings. So it was kind of forced upon the schools. So teachers also have to take care of children with special needs within regular big classes. So you can imagine the effect on education and the attractivity of the profession. When you just look at the slide, you see that the education sector is the burnout champion of the Netherlands, year after year. In all professions, there's a kind of 13% rate, but in education, on average, it's like 22, and in secondary education, it's the highest. And we see this kind of percentages coming back year after year. So, like in other countries, no more people want to be teachers. Teachers are leaving the education sector, and I think it's exactly as in the UK, especially young teachers, 1 out of 3 in secondary, for example, leaves education within 5 years. So we have the same kind of problems. And this leads to a higher workload for those who are still there, but it also leads to a huge decline in quality. And we can prove that with PISA data, because we see the steady decline in a number of subjects. And it results also in growing inequalities between pupils, for example. But all this has not really alarmed our decision makers, because even with all the shortages we have and all the experiences, negative experiences also during the pandemic with remote education, they still think that unqualified and underqualified persons and technical solutions can save education. But we just have to live with it. We have seen very concrete examples of it. But of course we need quality education. We as a country, small country, partially under sea level, we do not have a lot of natural resources. Our best resource is knowledge. So we need to fight for this resource, and we are trying to turn the tide. So what did we do as a union to stop this process? It's not easy, it's very complex. We have been knocking on all kinds of doors for years and for years. We have commissioned research, we have launched petitions, organized manifestations, bigger and smaller. We presented lots of evidence. We come up with possible solutions in manifestos and more. And very often, ministers have said that we are right. Yes, this is the case, you're right. But they have never decided to fight for more investments. Sometimes it looked like there was some investment, but they were never structural solutions. And then hell broke loose on social media, somewhere in 2016, 2017, about teachers from primary education not being able to get a mortgage for a house in Amsterdam because their salaries were considered too low by banks. And suddenly the huge gap between the salaries in primary education and those in secondary education were highlighted because of all the social media attention. And as a union, of course, we were working on it, but it didn't get this big attention that some people on Facebook got. We started making steps to engage in long-term action. It was not easy. It's very easy, of course, to get tens of thousands of likes on social media. Easy, just press. So it's easy to get all these likes for higher salary, but it is a lot more difficult to know if people really will come for a strike and turn up in the streets. We don't have the ballot like in the UK, but yeah, we have to rely on what people say, but you never can be sure. So I think you will recognize what I'm going to say now. We have been investing then a lot of time, well, in going to schools and to speak with people to explain that a like is not enough, and that without them and their own actions we wouldn't be able to get results. And in the end it worked. We had huge turnouts and a high percentage of closed schools at our moments of strike. So investing in your teachers is very important, and going to speak with them. So I show you some of the slides of our strikes. We started with strikes in 2017. We started with shorter actions, and then on the 5th of October 2017 we had our first big strike, when the whole city of The Hague was one big traffic jam, because many more buses came from all over the country than we thought. So that got a lot of publicity. Everything was blocked. Then nothing happened. 12 December, new strike. 90% of primary schools were closed. But even then again, big turnout, many people in the streets, no extra money or just a little bit, nothing structural. But we couldn't go on paying for more strikes because we are a small union, so we had to be creative. So in 2018 we organized a number of regional strikes, like what you are doing in our own way. I think you have this kind of sequential strikes now. Every time in a different district, we had them in different regions, all over the year. So this is one of the strike actions, the manifestation in the east of Holland. And this one is in Rotterdam, the city where I live. There were many others, of course. And still, no extra money, or just a little bit. The focus at that time was mainly on primary education, because there the urgency was the biggest, with the large salary gap and people not being able to afford a house. But of course we didn't forget the other sectors, because we are a union with a lot of education sectors and we shouldn't have our members fight with each other. So we had other actions in between. So for example, here we were standing in front of the entrance of a congress of employers in secondary education. So we were posting at ministries and doing this kind of smaller actions. And teachers got angrier and angrier. So then we arrived in 2019. This is already the pandemic, so just go back one. No, it's not going back, leave it. We had a very, very big nationwide strike for all education sectors in The Hague. And like you heard also from Mary, from the UK, we did work together with a lot of other stakeholders, with parents, even with employers at some times, with other action groups in education. So we were there together all on the stage. It was next to the ministry. There were some people from political parties coming to see us. And still, after this very, very big strike, no structural improvements. Just a little bit here, a bit here or there. So again, we organized a new strike in November, which was mainly a big manifestation in Amsterdam with smaller strikes in the region, because we couldn't afford again for everybody to travel and to compensate. And the government even tried to discourage the strikers by announcing that they were thinking about investing more, but it didn't work. Of course, people came and striked. And then in the end, there was a budget proposed, and it looked promising. But 2 weeks later, when we had to sign an agreement, it turned out again to be a one-off investment, nothing structural. So we continued. Beginning of 2020, we had 2 days of strikes with large manifestations in all regions, and we were warming up for more. And then, you can imagine, the pandemic arrived. it was the period of closed schools. We had to postpone further actions, but we continued, of course, on social media and with smaller action, with fewer people as soon as this was allowed. So, for example, this is one of the actions where, together with others in the public sector, we put many empty seats on a big place to show that all these seats were vacant in our sectors, because the public sector in general has shortages. Also the health sector, the police, we are all looking for people. So we continued in a creative way, let's say. And we kept all this time in contact with all possible organizations, parents, etc. And we kept exploring creative ways to remain visible for the larger public. We started, for example, a petition together with Defense for Children and Parents Organization based on the right to education for every child. Because even in the Netherlands, it's not guaranteed anymore that every child has good quality education. So it's a petition that's still running. It runs since a long time. So we have tried a lot of ways to continue to get the attention. And finally, some of our efforts paid off last year. Finally, we had a new government then, that also helped. Finally, a structural budget was announced to close the salary gap between primary and secondary teachers. And it was real in 2022 when we could sign the agreement. But could we celebrate? Could we really celebrate? Yes, because one very unequal situation was rectified, and education was back a bit higher on the political agenda. But no, it didn't solve the shortages. This closing of the salary gap helped, of course, for a lot of people to stay in schools and not run out of education. But to attract more teachers, new teachers, a lot more is needed. I told you about the complexity of the situation. So we keep going, we keep fighting for the attractiveness of the profession, for better salaries in general, of course. We have to keep up with the inflation, which we don't. We want to, but we are getting less. We have also a housing crisis. I think it's also the case in Portugal. Teachers cannot find a house, especially on one of the first slides you saw that shortages are the biggest in the cities. We need teachers for the vulnerable children, but these are exactly the cities where people working in the public sector cannot afford any house, any apartment, nothing. So it's a big problem, which is difficult to solve as a union, so we need more parties in the society. We keep fighting for smaller class sizes, for less teaching hours, to reduce the workload. We fight for more teacher autonomy, for permanent contracts in higher education, for academic freedom, and we try to be creative. For example, What the Flex? This is one of our latest campaigns. It's a bit of playful action, creative action. We are going around from university to vocational training institute, the kind of institutes that have the most of the flexible contracts, because the managers there seem addicted to flexible contracts. So we made a self-help toolkit. We had some interesting movies, but they are in Dutch, so you wouldn't understand what is being said. We had a mobile rehabilitation clinic where you can go when you are addicted. So we offered them treatment. So we try to be creative. So at this moment, the actual situation in negotiations in most sectors is such that we are heading for new actions, and the first small one is announced for 16 May in secondary education. And apart from fighting for all this on the working conditions level, for example, we are also targeting now this intermediate employer level, because we want it gone, we want it out, because it will save a lot of money that we can use for the classroom. We want it out or largely reduced, or giving just little tasks maybe. And fortunately, the actual Minister of Education seems to agree that it has to change there, because he, as a minister, it's a young guy, he comes from a vulnerable background. It was not easy for him to get into university. He was active in the union, in our confederation, so he understands a bit more. But he feels helpless when he wants to change something as a minister because all the money is with the employers. And they have a different agenda, so I think he will be of help now. So we are fighting for that too. And then I can end my presentation also with a slightly positive note, because we hope that this minister will give us a bit of leverage. And I can end with some learnings. We learned that it helps to be stubborn and never give up. It's a long road, but we continue. We learn to work with a long-term vision. We learned to look also for unusual allies, parents' organizations and other action groups. We learned that it's important to base actions on evidence and on actual information directly from the schools, that we have to listen very well to our members and take them step by step through everything we do if we want them with us in the streets. And we also learned a lot from actions from other countries. Yeah, come on. Yeah, the last one. Because in many other countries, of course, you heard it, similar problems occur. And to conclude, we are not there yet, but we stand strong as a union, and we feel backed up by our colleagues from other countries. You see on the slides people from Germany and Belgium who came to support us in our strike in The Hague. And we go on fighting. And I try to say it in Portuguese, la luta continua.